about a double-blind placebo study on 35-year-olds that had been done with the redox molecules. Would you be able to talk us through this? Because this is brilliant.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, that came out probably about 3 months after I'd really started to work with the technology. And I kind of laugh to just digress a little bit, because I turned down that information in 2011 for the same reasons, like, yeah, you know, that doesn't seem that significant to me. And I really missed the boat. I mean, I kind of realized now between 2011 and 17, when I finally turned around and I nearly missed it again, ironically. You know, that there were obviously so many people that I could have helped very differently with this, but the significance of that study I find fascinating from many different levels. So first off, they started with 35-year-olds. And there's actually an important piece about that, because I've been reading it actually only in the last couple of months, that scientifically they've analyzed that the metabolism, I think often people think about metabolism as just to do with weight loss, you know, either you're thin or you're fat or whatever, and it's the metabolism is all about diet, but it isn't. Metabolism actually represents literally the function of every cell, the energetic production for anything to take place. And it's interesting that I was reading that our metabolism is energetic and kind of hits this tipping point at 35, and then we go downhill. And I was reading some things that were saying that we're actually going to spend from 35 to the end of our life struggling and never ever going to be able to achieve and maintain or restore the level of metabolism that we have cellularly up until that point. And that kind of overlays for me this piece about the double-blind study on the Asea. Here they were, 35-year-olds. So they analyzed their genetic expression, the signaling level, the efficiency with blood work. It went through this fancy multi-million-dollar machine, an Affymetrix array, for whatever we want to know about that. But so they tested it. Now, I think one thing to kind of, you know, emphasize about this is that at 35, their gene signaling had already turned off. It was already diminishing. Now, I've read studies that show that pesticides affect our redox signaling. So we know that there's a huge deluge that we're all suffering from in this particular lifespan where we're at, you know, that we're all being hit by not simply stress, but, you know, the pesticides, the chemicals, the environmental toxins, it's coming at us left, right, and center. So they have these 35-year-olds, they do the blood work on them, and they see that their genes have already started to turn off. They put them on the Asea, 8 ounces a day for 8 weeks, and then they retest their gene signaling efficiency. Now, here's really what I think was particularly stunning. 100% of the people taking the Redox uniformly experienced a 20 to 31% improvement in gene signaling efficiency in 5 major areas. Well, I actually do a caveat here, because I sat with one of the lead PhD guys when this got released. We happened to be at a dinner, and I talked to him at great length. And he said that, in fact, all the genes had uniformly experienced this improvement. But genetically, I don't think we're advanced enough, and they haven't mapped every single gene that exists. So in the report, they chose to simply talk about the 5 that are fully mapped and understood at this point. And so that was the innate immune signaling system. Hello, that's, you know, that's our initial defense line against everything, right? In inflammatory signaling. Cardiovascular health with vein elasticity, that's a pretty significant aspect to it. Digestive enzyme production, which, you know, being a digestive health specialist kind of caught my attention straight away, because that's all I do is enzyme stuff. And then the other side of the coin, that if we are unable to absorb and we have an inhibition in how we absorb, it actually changed that factor too. And then the 5th one was hormone signaling and vitality and kind of wellness. So 100% of people had these uniform shifts. Now, we always talk about the fact that this is made from what's in our cells, the same thing our body uses, which is the saline in our cells, sodium chloride and water. So, of course, there's a lot of misinformation because people put a lot of junk out there on the web, right? You know, oh, this is just salt water. Well, you go make salt water in your kitchen. You're not going to get the same outcome from this at all. It is not. And if it was that simple, why would we have a company that's been manufacturing this for 12 years with multi-million dollars of investment and patents and proprietary process to come up with something that's entirely different than just go to your kitchen and pour some water and stick some salt in it, right? But they gave them saline on the placebo group. Now, two pieces. 100% of people taking the Redox had this improved benefit. On the placebo, it was a 0% change.
Oh.
That struck me in and of itself. Forget Asea, that in itself is really remarkable, because in double-blind studies, placebo will influence anything, right? If we believe there's a certain shift, I mean, that's why they have placebo. So when that study came out, I actually went back to a number of research scientists and I said, okay, tell me, you know, how often, if you're doing research on drugs or whatever you're studying, do you ever see 100% response to whatever you're testing and a 0 on the placebo? And they all said to me, never. Don't see that. So what does that mean? A couple of things, right? At 35, you don't feel your genes are already turning off. You know, you only know that by looking at blood work. We don't notice that, but I think we do begin. That correlates with why this tipping point is coming at 35, because we're now on the slide. We've already started a slide. We start that around 15. I mean, in terms of production of these molecules drop, but I think cumulatively, we don't necessarily become particularly aware of the fact that we are aging, but how many people by the time they get to 40 start to notice what has already been building in the previous 20 years? And so there's those layers that will tie into this. But, you know, I looked at that and I said, wow, as a practitioner, you know, everything lies in the first two, immune response and inflammation. I mean, we know that disease creates inflammation, inflammation creates disease. So there you go around. That affects everything that anyone's coming to the table with. And then you have these three other major things. But here's what's interesting. We have 5 names there for single gene names, but they're like a domino effect. You open a door and then they move on, right? So this is not a one and done thing. I mean, this is, you know, those wonderful domino games that people do when they roll on and roll on and roll on. That's my picture in my mind. But here, the inflammatory signaling marker, for example, there's 15 other markers. Things that those influence are things like serotonin. That keeps us feeling happy, right? Who do we know that feels stressed and anxious about what we've gone through in the last 2 years? How many teenagers are really struggling with feeling, you know, at ease with themselves? I mean, that's enormously important. And if you have gut dysfunction, you're going to have that serotonin dysfunction. I mean, they go together. Things like circadian rhythm and sleep, that affects every single one of us. You know, things to do with insulin signaling, thyroid, how we build brains with BDNF, this fancy thing called BDNF, which is building brain signals. Hello, we all need to keep those in good check. And interestingly, the BDNF piece also links back again to insulin signaling and metabolism. So, you know, there's all sorts of things that go on in this. So when we say we're improving our inflammatory signaling markers, we're also improving multiple things behind it. There was another study, they looked at it, you know, another 8 weeks after people had stopped taking it. And what was really interesting was that the original marker levels that people had, whatever was their kind of backstop point where they were operating, that was kind of where they had reset themselves to back to this level of less function than they had with the Asea. So I think a really significant thing that shows us, you know, this affects everybody, is there for everyone.